Joining us now is Robert Bork Jr. He works in litigation. He also is with borkgroup.com, and this is his wheelhouse. And he joins us now via Skype. Sir, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to get your reaction here to that discussion, that response that you just heard from Senator Warren, because that's not really what's happening. And it doesn't really seem that the Senate really, or anyone in Congress, should be able to weigh in and tell someone how to operate their private business. There's no monopoly there.
No, there is certainly no monopoly. And the antitrust concerns are a little vague, I think, at this point. But clearly, if Apple and Google threaten Twitter, someone ought to look into that. Of course, I think Elon Musk certainly has a right of private action he could bring if they try to shut him down. That happened to Parler, and they got squeezed off of AWS. But I think they're back there now. They had to fight for it. Look, some of this is just a lot of noise, I think. And Elon Musk loves being in the news. He just loves tweaking everybody. In fact, I just saw a story this morning when I knew I was going to be on your program, that he flew out to Apple headquarters and met with Tim Cook, and they made nice, maybe, it looks like. So
yeah, it remains to be seen. Yeah,
who knows what's going to happen next? Exactly.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. They went out and discussed, I guess, the issue of whether or not Apple was going to kick Twitter off of the App Store. And Tim Cook said, no, that's not going to happen. But whether the advertising thing, I think, is another issue. You brought up a really good point with Parler, because I think it was this time last year, maybe 2 years ago. And Twitter intervened at that point with Amazon Web Services and had Parler kind of booted off of that. It does seem, and I always am really careful. I know what I know and I know what I don't, which is why we have you on, providing your expertise for our audience. But I understand the concerns about private business practices, but it does seem weird when you have companies like Apple that can control this entire marketplace with the App Store and these other tech companies, where they can actually deprive customers of that competition that gives us those choices. When you look at Apple and their footprint, do some of the antitrust arguments that some have been making on the right, do those make sense to you? And how?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, they do. Look, when you first of all, let me just say this: being big is not illegal. Having a monopoly, believe it or not, is not illegal. It's how you got it and what you do with it. And if you use your monopoly power, to squash competition or to punish another company, or to raise prices, or to gouge consumers, then you are, in fact, opening yourself up for all sorts of antitrust trouble. The question I would have is whether this administration would actually really investigate it, because they don't like Elon Musk and they don't like Twitter now under its new ownership. So would they actually make the time to investigate? But I think with the new Republican House of Representatives, Tim Cook and the people at Google would find themselves hauled before committees, before Jim Jordan's Judiciary Committee, to find out what's going on. And I don't think anybody wants that kind of trouble. No, so I suspect a lot of this is hot air and sort of everybody poking the tiger. But we'll see what it really happens.
Yeah, I would like to see and I'd like to see some of those, the options that I think anyone would take. I'd like to see some of those articulated a little bit more, because right now everything is so vague. We're talking right now with Robert Bork Jr. with borkgroup.com. The other accusation that comes into play here that goes along with the antitrust issues is these platforms that are accused of acting as agents of state. We've had Jen Psaki and others with the administration. They've been up there on during the press avails saying verbatim that they did reach out to, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, and for the purposes of misinformation, ask them to effectively censor certain accounts or certain narratives. That comes into play, it seems, when there's the discussion of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because then doesn't that kind of make you more of if you're acting as an agent of state, that is censorship. And I don't see how that's also protected when you look at the way that that Section 230. I for the record, I'm not one of those people that want to do away with Section 230. I think it just, you need to have it edited. But
you need to fix it or add some additional law and regulation there. more transparency, frankly, to make
But
more
are they?
speech possible.
But they're not protected from any kind of legal action if they're acting as agents of state. They're not just a facilitator.
Well,
They're a
frankly,
publisher.
look, if they're operating privately, and because they have terms of service or whatever, and they say, look, we're going to take this down. I wish they would take more stuff down, like all the terrorism and illegal drug sales stuff that happens on their platforms. But if they're acting privately, that's one thing. If the government comes in and tells them to do it or asks them to do it, now you implicate the actual First Amendment, which the government shall make no law, restricting speech. So then that's a real problem, and then the government would have to get in, I think, and certainly the Republicans in the House and the Senate would start leaning on the administration to investigate that.
Yeah,
this is a very, very fraught area, this free speech stuff, because you understand these companies are publishers and they need to have some protections to help make all of this speech function. Otherwise, there will be no speech on the platforms. That was the idea, but of course, it's gone too far. It's become too ideological, and we just need to have methods in place to ensure that if you get banned or blocked, you have recourse.
What is the best way, you think, in your opinion, to deal with particularly the issue of Twitter? And the last question I'll have for you centers on Apple and China, but particularly with Twitter and the criticisms coming from Washington. I mean, I don't see any need for DC to intervene. How should we go about this? What's the best practice here?
DC to intervene in what precisely?
And with regulation, some of what whether it's Ed Markey, what he has said, Elizabeth Warren talked. Well, we need to look at what they're doing. We need to look at, if they're actually keeping hate speech off the platform.
Well, they didn't say that when Jack Dorsey was running it, so it's just ridiculous. And of course, I know your audience is intelligent enough to hear that stuff and just dismiss it for what it is, which is liberal hoo-ha. But that's not going to happen.
Last question for you on the issue of Apple, because we've been discussing free speech and antitrust. The AirDrop feature that Apple phones, we had a headline earlier this week where Apple, for only the phones that were sold in China, they had suspended the AirDrop feature, meaning you didn't even need the internet. You could just create a network between phones, and it was incredibly successful with protesters in Hong Kong, which is why CCP definitely wanted to squash it. So for the phones, the actual phones that were sold to mainland China, they had disabled that feature. It could only operate for 10 minutes at a time, and then you had to go in and manually do it so they could disrupt that network. You have an American company that is helping the CCP essentially suppress speech. I just find that incredibly interesting in the context of the conversation we were just having about Apple and Twitter. And I just wanted to get, your 30,000-foot view.
I have two thoughts. One, let me just point out something very interesting, connecting Elon Musk back into this. Elon Musk is flying his little satellites over Ukraine so that they can communicate and fight the Russians. In the meantime, Apple is facilitating that crushing of speech and dissent in China. I think, frankly, anybody who's doing business in China, making anything in China, ought to be looking at other places to make it. I know during the Trump administration, there was an effort started to try to move American production out of China. I don't think it's gone very far, but that's something we ought to be doing.
Yeah, I completely
That would be
agree.
a way to deal with some of this stuff.
Repatriate some of that manufacturing so we could be less dependent and not have to worry if we hurt their feelings, for the lack of a better way to put it. Robert Bork Jr., you can find him at Robert_Bork_Jr. on Twitter. We have that also in the lower third as well. And you can also find him at borkgroup.com. Really enjoyed our conversation. We'd love to talk with you again.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you so much. Good to see you too.